Good morning, everybody. I would like today to talk about, of course, classical music. What else? What's the function of classical music, the real function of classical music in our society? Well, you might think classical music as something, if you think about the function, you think, okay, I like classical music. Why? Because I would like to always listen to classical music before I sleep. So classical music is something soothing the heart, soothing the mind, and so it usually makes you feel sleepy, and then you sleep better. Well, okay, that's one of the function of classical music, but it's not the only function. I mean, if you want to sleep better, you just drink, a sleeping pill, and then you feel better. You sleep better. There's one key to the answer of this, the function of classical music, is about why classical music is so widely played and performed and listened to and loved throughout the whole world. I mean, every country, or maybe more than 90% of all countries in the world, listens to classical music and gets to perform classical music. About this, in fact, it's something which is crucial, is that classical music is always written down. And that's what differs classical music from other genres, other kinds of music. Classical music is always written down note per note. So if you listen to the music of Beethoven or of Mozart, you listen to what really Mozart and Beethoven wanted the music to sound like. But it's different if you listen to jazz music. You listen to Chick Corea and you listen to Friedrich Gulda or whoever, Art Tatum, the same music always sounds different, right? And then with folk music, you learn folk music through your parents or through your ancestors. They sing it to you, or they play the instruments like the gamelan or the angklung, or even the folk music of Hungary, of Transylvania. People outside Hungary and Transylvania, not so many people know the music of Hungary or Transylvania. And it's the same, the folk music of Indonesia. Outside Indonesia, not many people know the music of folk of Indonesia from, Tapanuli, from North Sumatra, or from Bali. Why? Because it's more difficult to distribute. Well, yes, now you have YouTube, now you have, and before you have compact disc and everything, so you can listen. But to be able to play it, it's not that easy. And that's why classical music is more practical, because it's written down. So if you're an Indonesian pianist and you want to play the music of, I don't know, Prokofiev or Rachmaninoff or Beethoven, you can. You just get the score, the musical score, and anybody who can read notes, you can play the music of Beethoven or of Prokofiev. Yeah, it's not that easy, because reading notes is not that easy. But in Europe, every children in their primary school, they learn how to read musical notes. So basically, that's how classical music can propagate, can be widely known throughout the world. So, but why classical music is so important? And well, yes, folk music and everything, basically all music is important. But why? It's something to do with what we always say about music, that music is heightened speech, they said. Heightened speech, which means, heightened language. Even the Polish composer Frédéric Chopin once said that music speaks directly to your heart. So, you don't have to digest it through your mind, because you immediately feel it. Yes, and music has the power to express things which, with the words or languages, are difficult to express, because it's about emotion which are too deep, or it's too sophisticated or too complex, so that the words are unable or powerless to express it. So that's the the basic purpose of music, communication, just like language. But then why? Why do we need to communicate, like with language? Um, there are several theories why people or humans need to communicate. Because, animals, they don't need languages. They don't need speech to communicate with each other. But humans, yes. And I always think so much about this. And I wonder if you know the film Dead Poets Society. Have you ever watched that film? Oh, you should, because, well, that film changed my life. It was released in 1990 or 1980 something, late something. Most of you haven't been born yet. But anyway, it was Robin Williams who was the film star of that movie. He played as Professor John Keating as a language teacher. And he said about language, he said, the function of language and the function of speech is not to communicate, but to woo women. The function of communication also is to woo women. So the very first language was created by men to woo women, to seduce women. Okay, you might say, yeah, it's not really true. Okay, but let's analyze this. You start to approach somebody. Like, for example, you're a boy, and you're walking in the street, and there are so many people. You don't just come to a random girl or a random person just, and want to communicate with her if you're not interested in her, right? So basically, communication is to tell somebody personally that I like you and I want you to like me. That's the very basic thing of communication. And in fact, that's the basic one. But the millennial one is like social media. You post something because you want to share something and you want people to like you, which is to press the button like or love or whatever. So it's basically you like and you want to be liked. And then Robin Williams said you love and you want to be loved. So that's the basic of language and communication. So, and that's not only from human to human, but also from a group of people to another group of people, a school to another school, a race to another race, and the bigger one is from country to country. And that's where art comes in, art or artistic product. If a country is a shop, then its artistic products is the shop window. I could say that. And yes, you open a shop and you want people to buy your products, of course. But for the shop window, you don't necessarily want people to buy what you exhibit in the shop window. The shop window functions so that people would like and would see your shop and would like to enter the shop. So what you display, what you exhibit in the window shop is just a display so that people come in. And that's, in a country, it's like you would like tourists to come in. You would like investors to come in. And you need a window shop for that. And that window shop is any artistic product. It's, paintings, literature, music, and that's where classical music comes in. Why classical music? Because classical music is easier to communicate because it's already so widely known, and easier to perform because it's so standardized, unlike other things, folk music. Okay, but we use the identity of our country, right? I mean, the shop should be, if we imagine our country as a shop, the shop should be identified as my shop. And so we cannot just show people, oh, this is our folk music. No. The folk music, or whatever we sell to the shop, has to connect to the consumer. And that's where the techniques of making classical music comes in, again. Because we modify these music into, for example, pieces for piano or for orchestra, and for anything which is already available throughout the world. So the communication is two ways. It's not that, I want to show this and you have to understand me. No, I want to show something which you can understand. That's the thing. I want to give you an example about the power of window shopping like this. If I mention a big city like Barcelona, then immediately you think about the architecture of Antoni Gaudi. Okay, yes, Barcelona is a cosmopolitan city, it's beautiful, but why is it beautiful? Because of its architecture. And then I mention a smaller city, Florence in Italy. And then you immediately think of the beautiful paintings. I mean, painters came from there. Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli, so Florence is identical to paintings. And then even a smaller city and maybe a village. If I mention Salzburg in Vienna, you immediately think of, well, two things. First is the location of the film, The Sound of Music. So visually, you think about the film, The Sound of Music. But musically, in fact, you don't think about that film. You think about Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Who doesn't know Mozart, right? Even maybe you have never heard his music, but maybe you have eaten Mozart chocolate. And Mozart chocolate comes from Mozart, who is the Austrian composer, who was born in Salzburg. And that's why if you mention Salzburg, you think of Mozart, and Salzburg could attract tourists because of Mozart. Why do people come to Salzburg? Because they want to see where the location of the film Sound of Music and where is the house where Mozart was born. So that was famous examples already. Now, I want to mention to you an example which is very recent. I live part of my life in Spain. I live near Bilbao. And you said, Bilbao, like 10 years ago, when I mentioned Bilbao, and you said, where is Bilbao? What is Bilbao? And now, people know about Bilbao. Why? Because Bilbao has commissioned the American architect Frank O'Gary to construct the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. So now Bilbao is identical to Guggenheim Museum, which is a very avant-garde kind of architectural building. And of course, the Guggenheim Museum, which is just a museum, has attracted so much tourists and has boosted the economy of Bilbao that it becomes now a major city in Spain. And not only it attracts tourists, but of course it attracts investors, and they start to make they start to invest in Bilbao in new buildings, and now Bilbao has developed and has changed into really a beautiful, not only industrial city, because before Bilbao didn't attract tourists at all. Bilbao was just a small city with less than 1 million people. There's a part of industrial section in the city, and it wasn't attractive at all, but now it's very much changed. So, but then again, you come to Bilbao to see a museum which attracts you. So it's not that easy, as I told you, that if you want to show Indonesia, you show the folk music of Indonesia. No, in fact, Indonesia has made this kind of mistakes for a long time. For I don't know how many decades, Indonesia has exported the raw coffee beans. That everybody in the world, they all drink coffee. We all drink coffee. And Indonesia is one of the biggest coffee producers in the world. But we only export coffee, but we don't process it. So, and what happens? We export coffee with a very cheap price, and then some country, they process the coffee, and then they exported it back in Indonesia. So we imported the processed coffee, and the coffee with a big labels, big trademarks. I think you can imagine what kind of trademarks. I just drank one just before. Uh, and so we buy our own coffee. And that is the biggest mistake a country can do, just to export whatever we have as a raw material. And that's what I do with my music, Rhapsodia Nusantara, which was already introduced before. Rhapsodia Nusantara is, in fact, a series of piano music, which is based on Indonesian folk music. But it would be very difficult if you just export the Indonesian folk music, like a group of angklung, to another country, because it's not familiar to them. And the other thing is that it would be very expensive to introduce Indonesia through a group of angklung, and even more, a group of gamelan orchestra, gamelan musicians. So what do? I take the material of the Indonesian folk music, I turn it into piano, and then I introduced to the world. But it's not me who introduced it to the world. It's the pianists of any other countries. I don't even go to that country to play my own Rhapsodia Nusantara. I just give my score, my musical score, to the pianists. And sometimes I don't even send it by post. Now I can send it by email from my desk. And then they play Rhapsodia Nusantara, and that means indirectly they are promoting the culture of Indonesia. Imagine a Russian pianist, a Hungarian pianist, a Brazilian pianist play piano, and they promote the Indonesian culture without any Indonesians being in the same in that concert. So it's an effective way to promote the Indonesian culture, which is that we don't have to, we don't promote it something raw, but we have to process it, just like we have to process the coffee beans. There are some other things. For example, I've been working with the company, maybe, well, you millennials, of course, have played the Angry Birds. You know, you've downloaded Angry Birds. Apparently, it's the most downloaded apps, game apps in the world, like I don't know how many billions. And this company is called Rovio, and it's from Finland. It's funny, I mean, I always think Angry Birds come from Asia or something, but no, it comes from Finlandia, from Finland. And this company last time asked me to write music based on their theme, Angry Birds, and turn it into classical music, just like I did with Indonesian folk music, and turn it into Rhapsodia Nusantara. Because Angry Birds, now they have the cartoon film, they have a book, and now they're going to go inside the business of classical music because they know how powerful it is to communicate to the world. To communicate to the non-millennials who don't play the games, who cannot even download it on the mobile phones. So they want to reach everybody, basically, and to introduce Angry Birds. What do I do with the theme of Angry Birds? I turn it into a Balinese music. So I make music which is called The Angry Birds Having a Holiday in Bali. And that is, in fact, they just asked me to turn it into classical music, but what do? I infuse the Indonesian element again there. So in a way, not in a way, directly, I say that Finland and Indonesia, we're good friends. We talk, we communicate through music. The Angry Birds, they are not angry anymore because they have been having a holiday in Bali. And Bali has that effect, you know. And especially because I made this, this music at that time when Bali was having earthquakes and everything. So, you know, I wasn't paid by the Indonesian government or the Bali regional government to promote Bali. I was paid by the company of Angry Birds. But this is my way to promote Bali, to promote how that tourists should come to Bali, and to say that Bali is now safe. So it makes both countries feel united. Like I said before, I like you, and I want you to like me. And this is the power of music, and this is the power of any artistic products to establish friendship and to keep on reminding each other that you like me and I like you. Yes, and I also, before I talked about Finland. Finland, of course, now you know Angry Birds, but Finland is using this classical music very powerfully to promote their country now, because Finland had the composer Jean Sibelius. Maybe you haven't heard Jean Sibelius, but you will in the next few months or years, because they are promoting it very much, just like Salzburg promoting Mozart. Sibelius, the whole country is promoting. Finland is the whole country promoting through Jean Sibelius. If you go to Helsinki, you find a beautiful park, and it's called the Sibelius Park. And if you want to have the apps now to write music, to write the notes, or it's not the apps, it's also a program for the laptops and for computers. It's called Sibelius Program. So this is one of the ideas to promote our country or our culture through music. And let's remember that music communicates, as Frédéric Chopin said, directly to the heart, which means that it gives less room to misunderstandings. You know, if you talk, you have misunderstandings, and sometimes, you know, you break up with your lovers because you talk, and you know, she thinks differently than you and everything. I can give you an example. For example, like in English, you say, I run a business, right? You have a business, I run a business. Now, you say it in Indonesian. You say, I walk a business. Saya menjalankan bisnis. So it's another perception. Here, a business should just walk, and there, a business should run. And that's why they're more developed than us. But if you say, saya melarikan bisnis, I run the business in Indonesian, that's something illegal in Indonesia. Right? And there are so many examples like that. I can tell you one other thing. It's in Dutch and in German. The word Kraft. Kraft in German is Kracht in Dutch. And when I studied in Holland, first I knew German, and then I studied Dutch in Holland. So first I knew German, and I just translated all the Germans into Dutch, which was sometimes not very wise. Because verkraften in German means to manage or to empower. But verkrachten in Dutch means to rape. And when I told a girl at the time that I would like to verkrachten you, of course we broke up immediately. So you see, the power of words is not as much as the power of music, because the power of music is so deep that it gives less room for misunderstanding, and that's the real power of music. So I hope now those who say that classical music is not your cup of coffee and everything, I hope you start to think about it again. Because now, you know, if you Google classical music Google automatically, well, you can try now. Classical music is, and Google automatically continue it to classical music is boring, classical music is dying, I think, classical music is for snobs. Only after, I don't know, 10 or something, you say, Google say classical music is what? Exciting, or it's beautiful, or whatever. But first, it's always boring or dying, and etc., etc. Well, it's not, because, as I said, classical music, the term classical music itself is wrong. It should be written music or literature music, because that's what differs classical music from the other music. It's the same. Mozart, Beethoven, and now with the composers who are still alive, like me, like John Williams. You know, if you go to the cinema, you watch Jurassic Park, you watch Star Wars. That music is classical music. It's written by John Williams. And it's just written music so that everybody else in the whole world, all the orchestras in the whole world, can play the music of John Williams right after it's being written. And that's why the music of Beethoven and Mozart can stand the test of time. Why? Because it's written down. So you can just get the music score, and everybody who learns the piano, who learns the violin, can play their music easily. And that's how we communicate to each other, because we understand the music, because it's the basic, the basic character is the emotion of the human beings. We make music because we want to express our emotion.